Hello there, and welcome to A Film a Day with me, Jordan Woodley. So, a new Matrix film is going to be released in the next couple of months. Not only that, they have released the first trailer for The Matrix Resurrections. So I felt that this was an ample time to go back and rewatch the original Matrix original one. Because what I'm going to do with this video is I'm very briefly going to talk about The Matrix and my relationship to it. I'm going to very briefly talk about the Matrix sequels, and then I'm very briefly going to talk about this new trailer, because frankly, firstly, I don't want to do videos on the Matrix sequels. I have a very complicated relationship with them, and I could have done a trailer reaction for the Resurrections, but frankly, I just think that I'd rather contain it to this one video. And I think it sort of ties nicely to sort of discuss the themes and ideas. And I'm going to aim to do that all within a 15-minute block. We'll see how that goes. Because frankly, and I forget this, I genuinely forget and underrepresent this in my own life, but The Matrix was a pivotal film in my cinema-going experience. It was definitely up there as one of the defining films of my youth that shaped my love of cinema and my, that the sense of what a film can be. And yes, that's partly to do with the Matrix sequels and partly to do with the fact that the original Matrix film is so constantly overturned and examined that you almost want to just forget it and forget the conversations around it just so you can watch it as a pure experience. And I've gone a long time without seeing the original Matrix film. It must be close to a decade. But I think that's really good, because rewatching it this time reminded me of all the things that I love about the original Matrix film. Because it is just... there is something about it that is so revolutionary and so it so well brings together action, ideas, an interesting story, an expansion on the sci-fi genre, that frankly its existence is almost an anomaly, because you'd almost think, how would they allow a film like this to be made and released as a blockbuster? And yet it exists. It is, unmovable in that respect. And I think it's, there is something amazing about it. It's one of those films where, going back, I was very fortunate that I was clearly one of those youths who, maybe it was the sort of time in which I my age category, maybe it was that I was already quite geeky, very young, and quite philosophical in certain degrees, but I went into The Matrix and had a fairly... I had conversations with people a lot older than I was who didn't really understand what was going on in The Matrix. And I would say to them, well, it's this and this and this, and it's about the idea of the dream world. And perhaps my understanding as I remember it probably wasn't as comprehensive as I remember it being, but it definitely awoke my imagination. And the idea of being trapped within this fictional world, and that there is, the ideas of reality and what is real, and how there is the layers of reality. And I definitely remember it awakening that sense of curiosity and sort of imagination within me, to such an extent that I would love to talk to people about The Matrix when I was younger. Because, like I say, this film was very brave, because it definitely has themes about... it discusses quite complex philosophical themes that, sort of Descartes ideas of reality and metaphysics. And, you have... there is, of course, the sort of religious undertones of it. And then you also have, we've recently... it's been brought up, the sort of trans... readings of it, and of course people saying, well, that wasn't there originally, and it's only because the Wachowskis both came out as trans that that's sort of retroactively been the case. But frankly, people who think that can swivel on, because the nature of readings and the nature of the evolution of storytelling is that things can be reinterpreted depending on generations and different ideologies. And maybe the Wachowskis didn't intentionally put it into the film, but when, of course, you examine things culturally, context is key. Whether it be social, historical context, reinterpretations through different generations. And so, perhaps, yes, it wasn't there originally, but it is there, and the reading is there, and you can clearly see the nature of the reading within it. But frankly, the nature of the Matrix and the storytelling means that it can be different things to different people, and there are different readings of the text about fate and destiny and inevitability, but also freedom and choice. And I think that's the wonderment of the film. And then additionally, you've got this genuinely revolutionary style of action and combat, and the idea of gun fu, and you even have the thwips of the hand-to-hand combat that were genuinely revolutionary. The fight between Morpheus and Neo, despite the fact that yes, you can see the strings in 2021, and obviously it looks more computer generated, and yet it is revolutionary, and I don't care. I can watch it now, and it excites me to see that fight scene. And so, like I say, if nothing else, it opened up the world of possibility and imagination in storytelling, and the idea that the end of the 20th century was the sign that we were seeing this kind of story open up. And science fiction and fantasy could be so much more than what it had been before. And I think The Matrix should be, heralded for that. It was a sign of that transition. And I just think it's one of, I've forgotten, and now I remember it is one of my favourite films of all time. I don't know where it ranks. I don't know if it's in the top 50, top 20, but it's definitely a great, great film that shaped my experience. So that's my love of The Matrix. And then you have the Matrix sequels. And I'm not going to do individual videos on them because, frankly, it's as simple as The Matrix Reloaded. I like The Matrix Reloaded. There are certain things in it and ideas that I thought were in the original Matrix film, but actually aren't. So that includes ideas that actually the world is expanded upon. You have things like, I didn't realise that the Oracle in the original Matrix is not stated to be a sentient program. It's possibly hinted at, and you could make that reading, but it's not until Reloaded that it says she is not a person, she is not a human, she is a program like the agents. And I think that's brilliant. That makes perfect sense for the world of the Matrix. Additionally, the action scenes and the way that the world expands is really interesting. The fact that you've got the what's he called, the French guy, and again, you think, these sentient programs who no longer work within the current Matrix structure. Even the architect. I know people hate the architect and how weird and dull that scene is, and yet I personally find it interesting. And again, you've got action set pieces like the highway scene, which is phenomenal. But yes, there are flaws in it. Primarily the fact that I think Neo is a great character, and I think that Keanu Reeves really does give a good performance in the first one. There is this weird thing in the first Matrix that I only noticed on this very watch, which is in the first section of the film, he does have to spend a lot of time either by himself, talking to people on the phone, or via computer. And so the only way they can fill the silence is by having him mutter to himself, which is weird. It's unfortunate, and it's not even something he could do I don't think anyone could do particularly well, but just to fill the silence, he has to sort of mutter to himself, which I think doesn't come across particularly well. But yeah, I think Keanu Reeves is really good in the first one. The problem you have with Reloaded is the fact that Neo as a concept, if you talk about messianic storytelling and the idea of this guy going from a man to a god over the course of the first film, it no longer makes sense that he becomes the main character in the second one because, as I say, he is a god. I'm not saying he shouldn't be a character, but he can't be the lead because he is no longer a character that we as an audience should identify with because he is a god, essentially. And so really the the shift should have focused to either Trinity or Morpheus as our lead, and the idea of them trying to keep up with this person who's becoming increasingly less connected to the real world because he is becoming more and more of a of this sort of transcendental figure within the Matrix. And so that's a thing it really struggles with, and so unfortunately it has to sort of nix him. It has to, find ways to make him not as powerful as he should be, when in fact, he should be unstoppable in the Matrix. I do like the idea of bringing Agent Smith back, I will say that. And the fact is, I like in the first Matrix film the fact that this Agent Smith could have been just one of the agents, and it didn't really matter which one was which. But they actually go to great effort to give him this sense of personality, and signs that there is already something broken and wrong with him as a sentient program. And so when he comes back in the sequel, and obviously he's been sort of rewritten, and now he's almost like this virus within the Matrix, it works because it's set up that before, and so and it expands his character in that respect. And then you get to the Reloaded, and the problems with Reloaded, where it just feels like it's retreading a lot of the same stuff. It doesn't quite know how to expand, and in some ways it limits itself. For instance, the megacity of the first film, as you watch the first film, this film is supposed to be the world outside our window, and yet when you get to the second film, they say, oh no, the whole of the Matrix is just the one city, which means it's not the world outside our window, it's its own construct that only exists within the storytelling of the Matrix, which is fine, but it slightly reduces the imagination, because it means, so it's not our world, it's not our type of, this is its own, it's its own thing. But as I say, even those things aren't the worst thing. The problems with Reloaded are that it's the middle film, and setting things up, and Reloaded would be perfectly acceptable, and I think Reloaded is a good film in its own right, but because it's setting things up, Reloaded would only be as good as Revelations can pay off. And Revelations, and I'm sorry about this, but I think Revelations is just nightmarish. This is a horrible film. It really feels like the sign of burnout, and the idea of the possibility of the Wachowskis not being able to keep control of the narrative. So that whereas there were really interesting directions that Reloaded and then Revelations could have gone, and instead it ends up being mech battles and spends so little time in the Matrix in Revelations that it sort of stops being about the Matrix and is more interested in the real world and the machines and the war. And honestly, yes, that is part of the story, but frankly it's not the thing that I was interested in as an audience member. Not only that, but it's very simple. The whole point of The Matrix, the first one, is how complicated and rich the storytelling is. And Reloaded sets up some really interesting ideas, particularly with the thing of Neo, at the end of the Reloaded, stopping a Sentinel with his mind, implying that Neo has powers outside of the Matrix. And they don't really expand upon that in Revelations, except to say he has powers outside of the Matrix. Whereas the reading that I've read, and I also sort of thought about myself, I think, at least, or rather was part of the zeitgeist of, is the idea that Zion and that world is still in the Matrix. That never goes anywhere. That would have been a great idea in Revelations. That's not what they do. And I think it's a shame, because Revelations it focuses on characters I don't care about. It becomes more like, it becomes more like 2000 AD, Judge Dredd type storytelling, and it just isn't the thing I was interested in the first place. And I think it's a shame, because it's just not good. It's just not good at all. I really can't stand that film. And so you get to Resurrections. And of course, all we have now is a trailer. And there are some interesting ideas in the trailer. It's a whole thing of... the one thing that I'm very, very, very concerned about with Resurrections is the fact that Keanu Reeves... I really like Keanu Reeves. He's a great actor. With the right material, he's a great actor. But Keanu Reeves is very much an actor who is shaped around the time where he is in his life. You know, you had the sort of cool guy, funny thing from Bill and Ted that transitioned more into sort of your sort of Tom Cruise style action hero of The Matrix. And then the Keanu Reeves we have now, of course, is your John Wick, almost like Zen Buddhist, but also almost, you know, sociopathic killer thing that's very good for John Wick. The problem wherein lies the fact that it feels, based on that trailer, that Keanu Reeves, by playing Neo, doesn't feel like Neo. He feels like something else. And that thing might be interesting and might take the story in a completely different direction, but the trouble is it no longer feels like Neo. And if that doesn't feel like Neo, will the rest of the story feel like The Matrix? Lawrence Fishburne isn't in it, purportedly. And so that's another element that's been taken away. You know, Hugo Weaving was supposed to be in it, but couldn't because of scheduling. Again, that's another element taken away. And Carrie-Anne Moss is in it, and looks like she's going to be a prominent character, but as we know from Revelations, the character died. And so therefore, we don't know what this version of Trinity is. And then, of course, you've got Yahya Abdul-Mateen III, who is a great actor, and I've talked about before, is a great actor. The concern being, he looks like he's doing a Morpheus-style performance, and it's just, it feels like, one, the major concern is that they're retreading the first film. That this is very much a Force Awakens of The Matrix. That is a huge concern, because it, as I said, the first Matrix film is about imagination and possibilities. If it retreads that, it's going to feel like the opposite of that. It's going to feel like, oh, we only have so much strength of storytelling. And that's going to be a real shame. And admittedly, the visual effects are interesting. And I hope it goes in a wildly different direction and expands on The Matrix in a way that we couldn't have seen before. I'm just concerned that it's going to not be able to live up to the expectations, and that was the problem with the sequels, which is The Matrix was, as I say, all about imagination, and unfortunately our imaginations will always be greater than what we, you know, if we're given time to imagine, whatever we're presented with will never be as good as what we imagined it would be, and that was definitely the challenge that Reloaded and then Revelations suffered with. And I think the problem with Resurrections is the idea that whatever it pays off, whatever it is, it had better be creative and imaginative and really expand and explore different ways the Matrix storytelling can be sort of expanded upon. Otherwise, we're just going to find, and if it does Force Awakens this, it's going to feel very limiting, and I think that's a shame. But we'll see. I have faith. I'm intrigued enough to want to see the film. It's just, there is a lot riding on this. But, circling back, frankly, as I said, The Matrix, the first one, is so groundbreaking and so creatively influential for me that if this doesn't work and we have to go back to just going, well, let's just forget The Matrix, I will forget all of the Matrix films except one, being the original Matrix film, and maybe Animatrix, which is strange and weird and interesting. But yes, I think, you know, if 50 years time we will still be talking about the original Matrix films, even if the sequels and the reboots and all these things don't work. The original Matrix film still lives by itself as this great piece of filmmaking. Anyway, thank you for joining me. If you like this video, hit the like button, comment below, and share the video, because this will help with the algorithm. Subscribe to the channel and hit that bell to get notifications of when new videos are uploaded. Check out my back catalogue of almost 250 videos, and follow me on Twitter at Jordan_Woodley, where I tweet about TV shows and films, and I share these videos once they're uploaded to YouTube, either the day of or the day after. Thank you for joining me. Take care.